Put your hands together. And then tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Shoulder and arm. The side. Upper part of your chest. Belly. And then the legs. Sitting back. So of course, we always start with the same routines. And it's like a pathway into a certain sort of feeling, state, awareness, however you think of it. There's quite an interesting image that comes from some Eastern meditative techniques, which says it's like walking down a path through a wood and then suddenly coming into a clearing. I think that's quite an interesting image. I've used this idea of spaciousness, stillness, so on and so forth in the past. And this image of the clearing in the wood is perhaps a useful way of thinking of that, and helps to explain really partly why we put so much emphasis on the routines and the regularity and the practice of the routines. If you walk a path regularly, you know it well. If you walk it regularly, it's more likely to be clear. And this has some basis in neuroscience with the hardwiring of the nervous system. And so, you know, one of the things about these practices, these mind-body practices in Tai Chi, is that they really do work on a number of different levels. I think another interesting element for me about this image of the clearing in the woods is that it's not saying you should never go in the woods, not saying that they're wrong or anything like that, nor is it saying that it's a hard line. There's a kind of, if you're in a wood and there's a clearing, it will just fade into the wood. So there's a few things perhaps about that image that are quite useful for us to have in the back of our minds as we start to engage with these practices. So just focusing your attention on your breathing, the weight of your body sinking into the chair, any other elements of posture that attract your attention. And waiting for this feeling of settling that is quite distinctive and which hopefully is a feeling that actually becomes more accessible to you through the practice. Just aware of those areas of contact with the chair, your hips and buttocks, your back. Those are the areas where you're probably most likely to stiffen up, and that tension will build through the rest of your body. So practicing that idea of letting go, just allowing that tension, that tightness to release is another good thing to remind yourself about. And then bringing your feet in and weight slightly forwards. Trying to feel weight in the soles of your feet. And if you can't, raise your heels for a short while. And that will probably put a bit more pressure in the balls of your feet. And that's the area then you want to get this releasing feeling in. And it will also make you aware that there is something happening down there. Slowly lower your heels so you're not straining in your calf muscles. And just see if you can feel that weight still focused primarily just behind the ball of each foot. There will obviously be some kind of pressure, very slight pressure in your ankles, and a sense of your calves, knees and thighs filling up a little bit with the weight. And again, hips, buttocks, lower back. Same idea, just allowing yourself to sink into the chair, and particularly in the lower part of your back, perhaps again experiencing that slightly denser, fuller quality. But very much with that whole part of the body, from lower back right down into your feet. It's not a static feeling. So there should be a sense of movement there. Nice long feeling up through your back. Remember, your head rests on your shoulders. If you've got your back nicely aligned, and all you need to do is just put your chin in, and even though you're slightly angled, you'll start to get that pull up from the tail of your spine right into the crown of your head. The fact that you're slightly angled shouldn't create a strain in your upper back or your shoulders, because it's your feet and legs that are taking the weight. And if you can't feel that, if you can't recognize that, then just try this as a little sort of experimental thing. Remember, a few moments ago, we lifted our heels. Do that again. Do it a bit more dramatically. Really push down through the balls of your feet. And you'll probably find that in doing so, you push your shoulders back, and then you lower your heels and your shoulders go quite naturally forwards. Do that a few times, and then just come to rest. So you can, I said, an illustration of that connection that exists between your feet and your shoulders. The front of your body hanging slightly from the back, belly, solar plexus, and importantly, the rib cage, so that around the front of your body, where all the internal organs sit, we get away from this habit of pulling ourselves in. Your arms just resting, feel the weight of your arms and your hands on your legs. And remember, fingers are quite curved, not stiff and tight. There's space between fingers. And then slowly turning your head. Your shoulders. Going forwards. And then as your sides, circling around, winding around. Don't hold your elbows or your wrists or your fingers tight as you do this. And then up. And then back the other way. just rocking your weight forwards and backwards. And let's just take this a little bit further. Let's just look at this a little bit more closely, because I think it's one of those very subtle elements in the seated exercises that really will have a benefit, not just in the seated exercises, but also as we go into the standing exercise, because you have to work quite hard to really kind of get a sense for how you're using the legs. So this is how we would normally do it. But earlier, we twice have done so far today this idea of lifting the heels, once to get a sense of the weight in the feet. The second time to really make us more aware of that connection between what's happening in the feet and what's happening in our shoulders, of course the rest of the upper body. So if we combine these ideas, then what we can do is as you go forwards, you push from the hips and you raise your heels as you do that. And so we're more aware of that full feeling in the legs, and we get to a point where we feel ourselves being pushed back. The same is true in the hips and buttocks. But probably best, first of all, to just concentrate on what's happening in the legs. So we become aware of when there's a change to you. When is the right moment to change from going forwards to backwards, for instance. You know, in Tai Chi, of course, we use the terms yin yang to describe how opposite movements actually are part of a whole, and that there's a point of change. And it's quite often at that point of change in one area that we find that we're able to influence a whole range of changes. So it gets to a point eventually where, rather than thinking, do I need to go back now? There's a kind of knowing this is the right moment. It's not a thought, it's just something that happens. And then when you've done that for a while, again, I don't want you to strain your calf muscles. So leave your heels down and just go back to the basic movement, but see if you can retain some of that awareness. And you could do that. You could do that raising of your heels at any point when we're moving the weight. So, you know, we could incorporate it into a lot of the exercises that we do. But for the moment, I'm going to leave that up to you. You know, if you decide to do that in a particular exercise, I wouldn't do too many though, because as I say, it's quite strong on your calf muscle. Now turn. Again, you could try the same thing here. Just raise the heel slightly. So this is awareness raising as much as it is to do with anything physical, so that we get a sense of what we're looking for. So we view this process from the clearing, from that point of stillness and spaciousness. Because if we're right in the middle of the wood, there'll be other details that we will be concerned with. And then going to the other direction, the other side. So we need that still, spacious quality in order to develop the movements, to go beyond them just being like pretty exercises, as it were. You know, people sometimes say to me, well, you know, when are we going to do the advanced exercises? And my response is always, we've already done them. You just need to do these more. And then going back. and then new direction. Come back to the center, and then just raise your heel. So this approach, once again, really emphasizes the meditative element of Tai Chi and the importance of that, if you like, think of that way, mind training aspect of the art. Not that it's more important than the physical training, but it's as important and needs to be worked at in the same way. And then on the other side. One very common way, of course, of developing that in Tai Chi is simply standing. I remember being with a teacher called Grandmaster Chen Xiaowang, who's a very high-ranking teacher, on quite a sort of, I suppose in some ways you could call it quite an advanced course. And at the end of that course, there was about 20 of us on the course, and we'd learned a sequence of movements. And for the last time through that sequence of movements, what he did was we were all standing there waiting to start, and he decided to check our posture in the basic standing position. And he went around the entire group, and he did everybody, he worked with everybody for 2 or 3 minutes. There were 20 of us in the room. So that was an hour standing there. It gives you an idea of how much importance he placed on being in that posture, and by extension, the kind of meditative element of the art, of just being there, long before you get into any complicated movements. He saw it as that significant. So it's an important element there. So just let your hands come down and out to the sides again, and then going forwards. From that sense of being centered, if the image works from that sense of being in the clearing, we can, in theory, see all that is going on in the woods. So we can be aware of the whole body moving as one unit, as well as the different elements that compose that movement. And we've been focusing quite strongly today on the filling up of the legs. So that may be quite prominent for you. I hope it is, because that's the idea of focusing on it, to really spotlight that element. But we don't want to do it at the expense of everything else. So if you're going, oh, I can't feel it. If you start thinking about it too much now, you'll lose the rest of the movements. So the thing to do is to just do sort of not bother too much about that, but to do the movements as well as you can, but to make sure that you practice those little exercises on their own at some point. And then change into fisherman casting net. So we want to be wary of focusing on different elements in that way, is that it can become quite tiring and quite stressful. When you find yourself sort of getting into what I would think of as a hard concentration, then it's time to move your attention somewhere else. But our ability to maintain a much softer focusing is also aided and develops. And I think this is probably just sitting meditation is one of the best ways of doing that, because you then only have that idea to focus on. I've probably used the image that I picked up from another teacher, that rather than concentration, we should think of sort of gathering our thoughts, herding our thoughts, where a sheepdog might herd the sheep. And then rolling the ball in. And then pigeon spreads its wings. One of the lovely things for me about the whole practice of Tai Chi, and it works when I can just sort of like gather my attention in that space, that clearing, is just an awareness of my body sort of waking up, going through different exercises and feeling the effect on different parts of the body as the movement, the energy seems to just permeate different areas. And it can feel a little bit like almost like a burden being lifted sometimes. That tension and that stiffness we carry around can actually be quite tiring. And then pushing away. Punch with both fists. And your hands out. One more time. Now, just rest your hands a minute. Go back to this rocking exercise and go back to just raising your heels a little bit. So what we get is a slight sense of a push from the hips to push us forwards, and from feet and legs to push us back. It's almost like we're bouncing from hips to feet and back again. Because it's the downward movement, the rooting down, that creates the compression which springs back. So it's almost like a wave. It goes from your hips through your legs down into your feet, and it builds up in your feet, and then the wave is pushed back, flows over the legs and down again. But what would happen if that sense of pushing was simultaneous, so that both hips and feet pushed at the same time? In other words, we'd have one wave coming up from the legs, one wave coming forwards from the hips, and they'd meet in the middle. And when two waves meet in the middle, if you watch on the, if you go to the beach and you watch two waves, when they meet, this happens. They rise up. They push each other up. So start to make this forward and backward movement very, very small, until you don't actually feel yourself going forwards and backwards, but still trying to feel some of the push up from the feet and some of the push up from the hips. And so when they meet in the middle, that's when we get the movement, the energy to push our arms up. And then it drains away. So this also fits in, of course, with the idea of there being a counterbalancing movement, which is downward to the movement of the upward in the hands. And also gives us an idea of how we can get this movement upwards in our arms without having to strain with our shoulders or our back or the arms themselves. And it means that rather than just moving our arms and our upper body, we are genuinely moving the whole body. And then change to the wild goose. And parting the clouds. Now, dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Okay, now pushing in two directions. I should say this is two directions. We could add a third direction, which is the movement back towards the center of the body. So I'm thinking of that area between hips and waist. And we might think of that as a sort of physical location for that clearing in the woods. As we come back there and we move out, we come back to the center and we move out. There's, of course, another significance to an awareness of that center part of the body, which is its profound influence on all other parts of the body. It's connected directly to all parts of the body, like the hub of a wheel is connected to all parts of the rim of the bike by the spokes. So we have that, you know, push down through the feet and so on and so forth that we looked at earlier, and then we turn. And that changes the direction of the arm. So we have 4 directions now, or 5 if you count the movement backwards, simply by turning the center of the body. I can see some of you turning your head first. What I've sometimes said to people is, if that's what you're doing, do carry on doing it, because I don't know if you realize I do Chinese massage. So when you get a bad neck, I'll give you a discount rate. But seeing as how we're all in the middle of this pandemic and I can't really do the massage, I would suggest that you don't turn your head first. It's one of the best ways I know to damage your neck. And it's also a very common cause of falling. Remember I've said about before, this turning being a time when we might fall. So here is the focus of your attention, not up here. Come back, bring your attention back down that pathway into the clearing. Follow the movement down into the center. You might also want to think of coming back to that feeling of pushing down gently through feet and hips. In that sense, I think, you know, both the physical center of the body and legs and feet really are both fine, and that in a kind of conceptual sense, they actually constitute the whole of the center between. And this time, then change, scooping the sea and looking at the sky. So it's the center of the body that tilts forwards and back. There's a little bit of support comes from this other leg, and again, a bit of a push back. So don't ignore the other leg, the one that isn't extended. And then grasping the tiger's ears. If you can start to develop these different elements that I'm talking about, you'll find that the flow of the movement will become much, much stronger and more sustainable. And then on the other side. Change. And once again, rubbing your hands together. And then tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. And your arm. The other side. Part of your chest. Belly. And then stand. So, same thing, whether you see it as a physical process or as a meditational process, or ideally, I think, as both, this sense of bringing your attention in to the center of your body, to the feeling of gravity pulling on your hips and downwards, taking your attention down through your knees, into your feet. Just standing for a moment, letting your arms drop, feeling that stronger feeling going up through the middle of your body. It's really, it's kind of the result, if you like, of the sinking down. Think of being in water, and if you let yourself drop into water, you feel the push up. And then just rolling your weight forwards and backwards, feeling the transition of your weight from the heel of your foot probably the front part of your heel to about the ball of your foot on each side, and then back. This has a similar quality to that wave-like movement of the weight that I described in the chair. And you'll see from the side, stand the side on, line myself up properly. Here, as I go forward, there's a little bit of pivoting, swinging in my ankle. And then you see my knees moving. I'm exaggerating this a little bit, but you see the whole body just beginning to move. So see if you can sort of follow that movement up through your legs, knees, hips, your pelvis. Soften your knees, soften your hips, and you should feel that the pelvis is just adjusting slightly. If I exaggerate this again, if I go forwards a long way, I'm now about to fall. But if I can let my hips drop, the pelvis drop, the pelvis tuck under, then suddenly I'm back to the upright position again. So the pelvis and that whole area is very important for our mobility and stability. It's why in falls therapy, there's often a lot of emphasis placed on what they call the pelvic floor and strengthening the pelvic floor. You feel the movement going up through your back, through your spine, through your ribs. See if you can feel the spine itself floating in the back. And if you can, that's an image that you might be able to extend out to include the whole of your skeleton. And finally, your arms out to the sides, hands following the movement. So you're standing in the river, so swaying in the river. Notice, I get that movement in my hips first, and then the arms follow. And going back. And try and make use of the image. Most of us will kind of relate to that image quite well, I think, even if you haven't been in the water for a long time. And if how does your body respond to the image? How does it move? Don't tell it what to do, but rather tell it what you want it to do and see how it does it. Just to remind you about the hands, see how my hands are there, not like that or like that, there, that curved feeling. And then settling your weight, let your hips drop back and change. Again. And then the wild goose. And part in the clouds. One more time. And then 1 foot forwards. That same wave-like movement through your body. This time very much from one foot and one leg to another, but through the hips, through the pelvis. Taking a moment to settle each time. It's not this. So each time we move the weight, we finish that movement by, if you like, think in those terms, returning to the clearing. At the end of the class, we just embrace target, return to the mountain. That meditative quietening and settling, just pausing for a moment. And in that moment, we raise our toes, we raise our heel, and we establish the posture through one leg. So the pausing, the coming into the clearing, isn't instead of moving, it's actually an essential part of the movement. I love the phrase in one of the old Tai Chi writings that says, urges us really to seek the stillness within the movement. And stepping in, and then on the other side. So movements like this are both valuable in their own right. They're also constituents of movements like Dragonfly Skins the Water. So all of these things, the meditational aspect, pausing, if you like to think of it like that, feeling the movement, wave-like movement, however you interpret it, they're all things that are parts of the whole picture. So if your aim is to get better at Dragonfly Skins the Water, those are the things that you need to be practicing. Raising your toes and your heel. And then stepping. So if you're reasonably comfortable moving your weight, then you probably find that fisherman cast a net is a very straightforward movement, in which case going into Wind Blows the Willows is simply a matter of adding one more detail, which is to do with the turning in your body and so on and so forth. It reminds me a little bit of the saying that, you know, in terms of saving money, that if you look after the pennies, the pounds will look after themselves. So I'm going to do this with my back to you. We'll do fisherman cast a net, Wind Blows the Willows, and we'll do a little bit of stepping with that as well. And I'll do it with my back, so it's probably a bit easier for you to follow. So first of all, fisherman cast a net. And we don't get so caught up with your arms that you forget to pause, you lose that sense of what's going on in your legs. and then wind blows the willows. Raising your toes and your heel. And then, if you're comfortable with this, step. And shake out. And then one foot forwards and push and move past the neck. And then changing. Raising your toes and your heel. And step. And excellent. Go back to your chest. So embrace tiger, return to the mountain. Brings us right back to that original theme from the start of the class of coming back to something, coming back to the clearing, coming back to the mountain. These are all just images, aren't they? And so, you know, the important thing really is to feel for yourself what that actually means in your mind and your body. So just letting your hands drop down and pushing up. Remember, you can do this with the breathing pattern if it suits you to do that. It follows the expansion and contraction. So if you want the breathing pattern, it's an in-breath and out-breath. In-breath and this time your hands come down and just rest them over your belly. You may feel a little bit of movement there with the breathing, with the weight of your body in the chair, in your feet, the contact with the floor through your feet. Feel the support from your feet to your hips, head just resting nicely on top of your spine. If it gets uncomfortable with your hands there, you can move them to whatever position you like. Your shoulders drop. Just sitting for a few moments in this quiet space, not just physically sitting, but trying to gather, to collect your thoughts, your awareness, to herd your thoughts and your awareness into this space. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. So, look after yourselves.
How many more weeks have you got, Mike?
We will go through